The gunshot that shattered the evening silence sent every bird within a mile scattering into the darkening New Mexico sky. And Beckett Emerson knew in that instant his loneliness had finally driven him to the edge of madness, because he had just fired his revolver straight up into the air while shouting a prayer to God that he desperately hoped someone, anyone, would hear. His hands trembled as he lowered the weapon, standing in the dusty yard of his small ranch 5 miles outside Las Cruces, New Mexico, watching the last traces of orange fade from the horizon on this October evening in 1878. The silence that followed his outburst felt heavier than before, pressing down on his chest until he could barely breathe, and he wondered if this was what true desperation felt like. If this was what happened to a man when the solitude finally broke something fundamental inside him. Beckett had never been a religious man, not really. But lately, he found himself talking to the empty sky more often than he cared to admit. At 26 years old, he had built a modest but functional cattle ranch through sheer determination and backbreaking work. But the achievement felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. No one to sit across from at the dinner table. No one to hear about his day or tell him about theirs. His parents had died of fever when he was 19. His older brother had been killed in a skirmish with rustlers 3 years back, and the few friends he had in town were all married men with families, living lives that seemed impossibly distant from his own solitary existence. He walked back toward his house, a simple 3-room structure he had built himself from adobe and timber, feeling foolish about his dramatic prayer. What had he expected? That God would simply drop a woman from the sky? That some perfect companion would materialize out of thin air just because he had asked? The rational part of his mind knew how ridiculous it was, but the lonely part, the part that woke him in the middle of the night with an ache in his chest that had nothing to do with physical pain, that part had needed to do something, anything, to acknowledge the growing emptiness inside him. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the way most October mornings did in southern New Mexico, and Beckett went about his usual routine with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had performed the same tasks countless times before. He fed the chickens, checked on his small herd of cattle, repaired a section of fence that had come loose, and tried not to think about how every single day stretched out exactly like the one before it. By noon, the heat was oppressive enough that he decided to take a break in the shade of his porch, and that was when he heard it, the sound of a wagon approaching from the direction of town. Visitors were rare enough that Beckett immediately stood, squinting against the bright sunlight to make out the details of the approaching vehicle. It was a freight wagon, he realized, the kind that carried supplies between towns, and it seemed to be moving faster than normal, kicking up a substantial cloud of dust in its wake. As it drew closer, he could see the driver whipping the horses with unusual urgency, and a knot of concern formed in his stomach. Something was wrong. The wagon pulled into his yard in a spray of gravel and dust, and the driver, a grizzled man named Tom Fisher whom Beckett recognized from the general store in Las Cruces, looked down at him with a grim expression. "Beckett, thank God you are here," Tom said, his voice hoarse. "I need your help, and I need it now." "What happened?" Beckett moved closer to the wagon, and that was when he saw her, a young woman lying in the back among sacks of flour and crates of supplies, her face pale and covered in a sheen of sweat, her dark dress torn and dusty. "Found her about 10 miles east of here, collapsed on the side of the road," Tom explained quickly. "She was walking, can you believe that? Walking through the desert in this heat with nothing but a small bag. Said she was heading to Las Cruces, but she did not make it. She is burning up with fever, needs water and rest, and I cannot take her all the way to town in this condition." Doc Miller is out making calls to ranches north of Las Cruces, would not be back for 2 days at least. Your place was closest, and I figured you would help." Beckett did not hesitate. "Bring her inside." He moved to the back of the wagon and climbed up, getting his first good look at the woman. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair that had come loose from its pins and now stuck to her damp forehead and neck. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and rapid, and even in her current state, he could see she was beautiful, with delicate features and long lashes that cast shadows on her flushed cheeks. He pushed aside the inappropriate thought and focused on the situation at hand, carefully sliding his arms under her to lift her from the wagon bed. She was lighter than he expected, or perhaps the adrenaline made her seem so, and he carried her into his house, Tom following close behind. "Put her in your bed," Tom directed, and Beckett did not argue, even though it was his only bed. He laid her gently on the quilt his mother had made years ago, and she stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering but not opening. "She needs water, cool cloths for the fever," Tom said, already moving toward Beckett's water bucket. "I would stay and help, but I've got a schedule to keep, supplies that need to get to Silver City by tomorrow evening. You can handle this, right?" Beckett nodded, still staring at the woman in his bed, his mind racing. "What is her name? Did she tell you anything else?" Said her name was Sophia Kendall, that she was coming from El Paso trying to reach Las Cruces where she had family or something. She was not making much sense, to be honest. The heat and exhaustion had gotten to her pretty bad by the time I found her. Tom handed Beckett a dripping cloth. "Keep her cool, get fluids in her when she is lucid enough to drink. She should pull through if the fever breaks in the next day or so." After Tom left, Beckett stood in his small bedroom feeling completely out of his depth. He had tended sick cattle, had even helped nurse his brother through a bad bout of pneumonia once, but this felt different, more intimate and terrifying in ways he could not quite articulate. He wrung out the cloth Tom had dampened and carefully placed it on Sophia's forehead, watching as her features relaxed slightly at the cool touch. For the rest of that day and into the night, Beckett maintained a vigil beside the bed, changing the cool cloths regularly, dribbling small amounts of water between her lips when she seemed conscious enough to swallow, and talking to her softly even though he was not sure she could hear him. He told her about his ranch, about the weather, about anything he could think of to fill the silence and perhaps, on some level, to reassure himself as much as her. As darkness fell and he lit a lamp, Sophia's eyes suddenly opened, wide and unfocused, and she tried to sit up. "No, no," Beckett said quickly, gently pressing her shoulder back down. "You need to rest. You are safe here." Her eyes found his face and he saw confusion and fear there. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough and dry. "My ranch about 5 miles outside Las Cruces," he explained softly. "A freight driver found you collapsed on the road and brought you here. You have a fever, but you are going to be all right, I promise." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she relaxed back against the pillow, her eyes still searching his face. "Thirsty," she managed. Beckett quickly poured fresh water from his pitcher and helped support her head while she drank, noting how her hands came up to grip the cup with desperate strength. She drank the entire contents and would have taken more if he had let her, but he knew too much too fast could make her sick. "More in a little while," he promised, and she nodded weakly before her eyes drifted closed again. The fever broke sometime in the early hours of the morning, and Beckett, who had dozed off sitting in a chair beside the bed, woke to find Sophia watching him in the pale pre-dawn light filtering through the window. Her color looked better, the frightening flush replaced by a more natural paleness, and her eyes were clear and alert. "Hello," she said softly, and there was a hint of embarrassment in her expression. I am sorry for the trouble. Beckett stood quickly, feeling stiff from sleeping in the chair. No trouble at all. How are you feeling? Like I walked through the desert in October without enough water, she said with a weak smile, which I suppose is exactly what I did. That was foolish of me. What happened? The driver said you were trying to get to Las Cruces. Beckett moved to pour more water, which she accepted gratefully. Sophia took a long drink before answering, and he could see her gathering her thoughts, deciding how much to tell him. I was on a stage from El Paso, heading to Las Cruces where my aunt supposedly lives. But the stage broke an axle about 15 miles east of here, and the driver said it would be at least a day before they could get it fixed. I thought I could walk the rest of the way, that it could not be that far. I had not realized how much distance means out here, how empty the land is between towns. She shook her head ruefully. Back in Philadelphia, where I am from, you can walk for hours and pass through multiple towns and villages. Here, you can walk for hours and see nothing but desert. Philadelphia, Beckett repeated, filing away that information. That is a long way from New Mexico. Yes. Something shadowed her expression. I needed a change, needed to get away and start fresh somewhere new. My aunt, my mother's sister, moved to Las Cruces years ago, and when I wrote to her saying I wanted to come west, she invited me to stay with her. But now I am wondering if I even have the right town, if she even exists, because I cannot quite remember her married name, and I am beginning to think this entire plan was ill-conceived from the start. There was a story there. Beckett could sense it. Some pain or trouble that had driven this well-spoken woman from the civilized East to the harsh territory of New Mexico, but he did not press. What was your aunt's first name? I know most folks in Las Cruces might be able to help you find her once you are feeling better. Margaret, though she went by Maggie. She married a rancher or farmer, someone with land. That is about all I remember from the letters, which were years ago now. Sophia looked down at her hands, twisting the sheet between her fingers. I know how this sounds, showing up in a strange place with barely any information, no real plan. You must think I am completely reckless. I think you are brave, Beckett said honestly, and was rewarded with a surprised look and a genuine smile that made something flip in his chest. It takes courage to leave everything you know and start over somewhere completely different. Reckless, maybe, but brave too. Over the next few days, as Sophia regained her strength, Beckett found himself looking forward to every interaction with her in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. She was intelligent and well-educated, able to discuss books and current events he had only vaguely heard about. But she was also curious about his life, asking detailed questions about ranching and cattle and the practical realities of frontier living that showed genuine interest rather than polite courtesy. She insisted on helping around the house as soon as she was able to stand without dizziness, and Beckett found himself coming in from his morning chores to the smell of coffee and bacon, to find Sophia humming softly as she cooked breakfast in his kitchen. It felt surreal and wonderful and dangerous all at once, because he knew this was temporary, that as soon as she was fully recovered, he would need to take her into Las Cruces to find her aunt, and then she would be gone from his life, as suddenly as she had entered it. On the fourth day of her stay, as they sat on his porch in the relative cool of evening watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Sophia turned to him with a serious expression. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Beckett said, though he felt a flutter of nervousness. "That first night when I was fevered and not quite conscious, I remember you talking to me. You were telling me about your ranch, about how you built it yourself after your parents died. You said you had been alone for a long time." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Is that still true?" "Are you still alone?" Beckett felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the weather. I suppose I am, yes. There are not exactly a lot of eligible women out here, and the ones that are tend to prefer men who live in town, who have more stable, less isolated lives than a rancher can offer. That seems short-sighted of them, Sophia said quietly. You have built something real here, something solid and lasting. That takes a special kind of strength. Maybe, Beckett allowed, but strength does not keep you warm at night or give you someone to talk to over dinner. Lately, I have been thinking that maybe I made the wrong choice, staying out here alone, that maybe I should have pursued a different kind of life. Is that why you? Sophia trailed off, looking uncertain. Why I what? The driver, Tom, he mentioned something strange when he was leaving that first day. He said it was lucky he came along when he did, that it was almost like divine intervention because you had been. She looked at him directly now, her gray eyes searching his face. He said you had been praying for companionship the night before, that he had heard about it in town, that someone had heard a gunshot from your property, and you had been seen shouting at the sky. Beckett felt his embarrassment deepen into something closer to mortification. I did not realize I had an audience, he said, trying to keep his tone light. That must make me sound crazy. No, Sophia said firmly. It makes you sound human. It makes you sound like someone who feels deeply and is not afraid to admit when they are struggling. She was quiet for a moment, then added, I prayed too, you know. When I was walking through that desert, when I realized I had made a terrible mistake and was probably going to die out there alone, I prayed that someone would find me, that I would get another chance. And then Tom came along, and then you were there, and I have been wondering if maybe prayers really do get answered sometimes, just not always in the way we expect. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of connection that felt both exciting and terrifying. Beckett wanted to reach out and take her hand, wanted to tell her that he had been thinking the exact same thing, that her arrival felt like more than coincidence. But he held back, afraid of moving too fast, of scaring her away. The next morning, Beckett hitched up his wagon and they made the journey into Las Cruces together. Sophia had fully recovered her strength, and she sat beside him on the wagon seat looking out at the landscape with evident fascination, pointing out things that caught her attention and asking questions about the plants and animals they passed. She wore the same dark dress she had arrived in, now cleaned and mended as best she could manage, and she had pinned her long dark hair up in a simple style that was already coming loose in the dry wind. Las Cruces was a growing town, benefiting from its position along the Rio Grande and its role as a stop on various trade routes. The main street was lined with adobe buildings housing everything from general stores to saloons to a small bank, and people moved along the wooden sidewalks with purpose. Beckett drove the wagon directly to the general store, where the owner, a friendly woman named Mrs. Patterson, knew virtually everyone in town and the surrounding area. Margaret, who married a rancher, Mrs. Patterson repeated when Sophia explained what she was looking for. Well now, that could be Maggie Thornton, married to Robert Thornton, who has a place about 8 miles south of town. They are good people, been here about 12 years now. That sound right? I think so, Sophia said, though uncertainty colored her voice. It has been a long time since I heard from her. Mrs. Patterson gave them directions to the Thornton ranch, and as they drove out of town, Beckett found himself hoping irrationally that they would not find the place, that Sophia's aunt would have moved away, that something would prevent this reunion and keep Sophia in his life a little longer. He felt guilty for the thought, knowing how important this was to her, but he could not quite suppress it. The Thornton ranch, when they found it, was larger and more prosperous looking than Beckett's own, with a main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals containing both horses and cattle. A woman in her late 40s came out onto the porch as they approached, shading her eyes against the sun, and Beckett heard Sophia's sharp intake of breath beside him. "Aunt Maggie," Sophia called out uncertainly. The woman's face transformed from curiosity to shock to joy in rapid succession. "Sophia! Sophie, is that really you? Good Lord, child, I thought you were never coming." What followed was a tearful reunion that Beckett watched from a respectful distance, helping Robert Thornton, who had emerged from the barn, unload Sophia's small bag from the wagon. Robert was a solid, weathered man in his 50s who greeted Beckett with a firm handshake and an assessing look that suggested he saw more than Beckett would have liked. "So you are the one who rescued our niece," Robert said, and it was not quite a question. "I just provided a place for her to recover," Beckett said modestly. "Tom Fisher did the real rescuing. Margaret will want to hear every detail, and knowing my wife, she will have questions." Robert's expression softened slightly. "You are welcome to stay for supper, of course." "It is the least we can offer." Beckett wanted to refuse, wanted to make a clean break and get back to his ranch where he could process the hollow feeling that had opened up in his chest. But Maggie was already insisting he stay, and Sophia was looking at him with those gray eyes, and he found himself agreeing before he had consciously decided to do so. Dinner was a lively affair, with Maggie asking countless questions about Sophia's journey and her life in Philadelphia, and Sophia giving carefully edited answers that Beckett suspected left out significant details. He learned that Sophia's parents had died 2 years ago within months of each other, that she had been living with a cousin's family in Philadelphia, and that she had decided to come west for a fresh start and new opportunities, which told him absolutely nothing about what she was really running from. As the evening wore on and the conversation flowed, Beckett found himself watching Sophia more than participating, noticing the way she gestured when she talked, the sound of her laugh, the intelligence in her eyes when she listened to others speak. He was falling for her, he realized with a mixture of elation and dread. Perhaps he had been falling for her since that first moment he lifted her from Tom's wagon, or perhaps it had been a more gradual process over the days of her recovery. But either way, the reality was undeniable. He was falling in love with a woman he had known for less than a week, a woman who had her own life and plans that almost certainly did not include him. When he finally stood to leave, making excuses about early morning chores, Sophia walked him out to his wagon. The night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant in the black sky, and they stood in the yard in the pool of light spilling from the house windows, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "Thank you," Sophia said softly, "for everything you did for me, for saving my life, really. I know I can never repay that kind of debt." "There is no debt," Beckett said firmly. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," she disagreed. "You did more than most would have. You took a stranger into your home, cared for her, asked nothing in return." "That is rare, Beckett, rarer than you probably realize." She paused, then added in a quieter voice, "I am going to miss our conversations, our evenings on the porch. These past few days have been some of the most peaceful I have known in a long time." "Me too," Beckett admitted, and the words felt inadequate to express what he really meant. "If you ever need anything, if you ever want to visit or just talk, my ranch is not far. You would always be welcome." "I would like that," Sophia said, and then, before he could react, she stepped forward and kissed his cheek, quick and soft. "Good night, Beckett." He drove back to his ranch in a daze, one hand unconsciously touching the spot where her lips had been, his mind replaying every moment of the past days, analyzing every word and gesture for meaning. The house felt emptier than ever when he returned, the silence more oppressive, and he lay awake in his bed, the bed where Sophia had slept, breathing in the faint trace of her scent that still lingered on the pillow, and wondered if he had just let the best thing that ever happened to him slip away. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Beckett's life. He threw himself into his work with almost manic energy, repairing things that did not need repairing, organizing things that were already organized, anything to keep his mind occupied and away from thoughts of Sophia. But it was useless. She was in his head constantly, and he found himself having imaginary conversations with her, wondering what she would think about this or that, wishing she was there to share the sunset or the way the wind moved through the grass. He went to church the following Sunday, something he had not done in months, partly out of a vague sense that he should be grateful for answered prayers, and partly in the hope that the Thorntons and Sophia might be there. They were not, and he sat through the service barely hearing a word, then rode back home feeling foolish and frustrated. On the 16th day after he had taken Sophia to her aunt's ranch, he was working on replacing some boards in his corral fence when he heard the sound of a horse approaching. He looked up, shading his eyes, and felt his heart jump into his throat. It was Sophia, riding a bay mare, wearing a split-riding skirt and a wide-brimmed hat, looking more confident and comfortable on horseback than he would have expected from someone who had grown up in Philadelphia. She pulled the horse to a stop a few feet away and dismounted with practiced ease, and he could see now that her face was nervous despite her capable arrival. "Hello," she said. "Hello," Beckett replied, setting down his hammer and walking toward her, trying to keep his expression neutral even though his pulse was racing. "This is a surprise. A good surprise, I hope." She tied her horse to the fence rail, fussing with the knot longer than necessary, not quite looking at him. "The best kind," he said honestly. She finally turned to face him fully, and he could see she had been working up her courage for something. "I needed to talk to you, and I did not want to do it in a letter or with my aunt and uncle present. I needed to say this in person, just the two of us." "All right," Beckett said carefully, his mind racing through possibilities, both good and bad. Sophia took a breath. "These past 2 weeks have been strange for me. My aunt and uncle are wonderful, kind, and welcoming, and they have made it clear I can stay with them as long as I like, help with their household, maybe eventually teach school in Las Cruces if a position opens up. It is everything I thought I wanted when I left Philadelphia, a fresh start, a new life, family to support me." "That sounds good," Beckett said, though the words felt like stones in his mouth. "It should be," Sophia agreed, "but I have been miserable and I could not figure out why at first. I kept thinking about our conversations, about those evenings on your porch, about the way you looked at me like I was someone worth listening to, worth knowing. And then I realized what was missing, what I actually wanted, and it terrified me because it was not what I had planned, not what I had come here expecting to find." Beckett felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of them, to this moment, to whatever she was about to say. "What did you realize?" "That I did not need a fresh start in terms of place or occupation," Sophia said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I needed a fresh start in terms of purpose, of connection, of finding someone who saw me as more than just a burden or an obligation or a problem to be managed. When I was engaged in Philadelphia—" "Engaged," Beckett interrupted, the word hitting him like a physical blow. "Was engaged, past tense," Sophia clarified quickly. "His name was Richard, and he was appropriate in every way according to my cousin's family. Appropriate family, appropriate prospects, appropriate in how boring and stifling and suffocating he made me feel every time we were together. He wanted a wife who would smile and nod and never have opinions about anything that mattered, who would run his household and bear his children and never ask for more. When I finally broke the engagement 2 months before the wedding, my cousin's family was furious. They said I was throwing away my future, that no one else would want me, that I was being selfish and foolish. So I left, used the small inheritance from my parents to buy a ticket west to the only family member I thought might understand the need to choose your own path. And did she? Beckett asked softly. She did, Sophia said with a small smile. But then she also saw right through me when I kept talking about you, when I kept making excuses to ride into town in the hope I might see you, when I could not stop dwelling on what might have been if I had stayed at your ranch longer, if I had been braver about what I was feeling. Beckett took a step closer, hardly daring to breathe. And what are you feeling? That I might be falling in love with you, Sophia said, the words coming out in a rush. I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. I know I should be more careful and practical after what happened with Richard, but I cannot help it. When I was with you, even though I was sick and weak, and at my absolute worst, I felt more like myself than I have in years. You made me feel capable and interesting and valued, and I cannot stop thinking about what it would be like to have more of that, more of you, more of the life I glimpsed in those few days. Beckett closed the remaining distance between them and took her hands in his, feeling them tremble slightly. I prayed for companionship, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I prayed for someone to share this life with, someone who could see the beauty in this harsh land and the value in what I am trying to build here. And then you arrived, literally on my doorstep, like an answer straight from heaven above. I have been falling for you since the moment I lifted you from that wagon, Sophia. These past 2 weeks without you have been hell, and I have been trying to convince myself to just let you go, to let you have the fresh start you came here for. But God help me, I do not want to let you go. Then do not, Sophia said. And then she was in his arms and he was kissing her, really kissing her. And it felt like every prayer he had ever whispered into the empty night was being answered all at once. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands coming up to frame his face, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she was smiling so widely it made his chest ache. Stay for supper, he said, and she laughed. I should probably get back before dark. My aunt will worry. Then come back tomorrow, Beckett said. And the day after that. Come back every day until we figure out what this is, where it is going. I am not letting you disappear from my life again, not if I can help it. I can do that, Sophia agreed and kissed him again, softer this time, full of promise. Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern. Sophia would ride out to Beckett's ranch several times a week, sometimes staying for a few hours, sometimes for the entire day, helping with chores and cooking meals and talking endlessly about everything and nothing. Beckett made several trips to the Thornton Ranch for dinners and social visits, getting to know Robert and Maggie better and being thoroughly but kindly interrogated about his intentions, his prospects, and his ability to provide for and protect a wife. Because that was where this was heading, they both knew it. The courtship moved quickly by Eastern standards, but was fairly normal for the frontier, where practicality and genuine connection often trumped lengthy formal engagements. Beckett found himself planning for a future that included Sophia, thinking about how to expand his small house to make it more comfortable, how to increase his herd to provide better financial security, how to build the kind of life that would make her happy. One evening in late November, as they sat on his porch wrapped in blankets against the cold, Beckett turned to Sophia with his heart hammering in his chest. I have been thinking, he said. That sounds dangerous, she teased, but her expression was attentive. I love you, he said simply. I know I have said it before, but I need you to know how much I mean it, how completely you have changed my life. 2 months ago, I was alone and convinced I would stay that way forever. Now I cannot imagine going back to that, cannot imagine a future that does not have you in it. I love you too, Sophia said softly. You know I do. Then marry me, Beckett said, the words coming out more bluntly than he had planned. I do not have a ring yet. I wanted to talk to you first before I spent money on something you might not even like. But I am asking anyway because I cannot wait any longer to make this official, to make you mine in every way that matters. Marry me, Sophia. Be my wife, share this life with me, help me build something lasting and real. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, and Beckett felt panic start to rise until he saw the tears streaming down her face, the joy written clearly in her expression. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, of course I will marry you. I would marry you tomorrow if we could arrange it. They were married on a cold but clear day in mid-December 1878, in the small church in Las Cruces with Maggie and Robert Thornton standing as witnesses and a handful of Beckett's friends from town in attendance. Sophia wore a simple white dress that Maggie had helped her make, and Beckett wore his best suit, the one he had worn to his brother's funeral and had not expected to need again for anything joyful. The ceremony itself was brief, the reverend keeping things practical and straightforward in the frontier tradition. But when Beckett slipped the gold band onto Sophia's finger and kissed her as his wife, he felt something fundamental shift in his world, like a piece of himself he had not known was missing had finally clicked into place. The wedding breakfast at the Thornton Ranch was a cheerful affair, with Maggie having prepared an impressive spread of food and several neighbors stopping by to offer congratulations and meet the new Mrs. Emerson. Sophia handled it all with grace, chatting easily with ranchers' wives and elderly Mexican women with equal comfort, and Beckett watched her with growing pride and love, thinking about how lucky he was, how close he had come to missing this entirely. They rode back to Beckett's ranch, now their ranch, in the late afternoon, and Beckett carried Sophia over the threshold in an excess of traditional sentiment that made her laugh even as she kissed him. "Welcome home," he said, setting her down gently in their front room. "I am home," Sophia agreed, looking around at the simple space with evident satisfaction. Finally, completely home. That night, as they lay together in the bed where he had first nursed her back to health, Beckett held his wife close and marveled at how dramatically life could change. 3 months ago he had been alone and desperate, firing a gun at the sky in frustration and loneliness. Now he had everything he had prayed for and more, and it still felt almost too good to be real. "What are you thinking?" Sophia asked sleepily, her head on his chest. "That I am grateful," Beckett said honestly. "For Tom Fisher finding you, for you deciding to come west in the first place, for whatever combination of luck and providence brought you into my life. I am just grateful." "Me too," Sophia murmured, already half asleep. "Best decision I ever made, getting on that stage to New Mexico." "Best collapse I ever rescued," Beckett replied, and felt her smile against his skin. The winter passed quickly, with Beckett teaching Sophia the practical skills of ranch life and Sophia gradually transforming their simple house into a real home, adding curtains and cushions and small touches that made the space feel warm and welcoming. They worked side by side during the day and talked for hours in the evening, sharing stories about their pasts and dreams for their future, building the foundation of their marriage with deliberate care. In February, Sophia suggested they try to expand Beckett's herd by purchasing additional cattle from a rancher north of Las Cruces, who was looking to downsize. It was a good opportunity, and Beckett was impressed by how quickly Sophia had grasped the economics of ranching, how she had ideas about improving efficiency and building toward long-term growth rather than just survival. They made the purchase together, Sophia negotiating the final price with a skill that surprised both Beckett and the seller, and drove the new cattle back to their ranch feeling optimistic about the future. By spring, their ranch was noticeably more prosperous, and Sophia had begun talking about wanting to contribute more to the broader community. She started teaching basic reading and arithmetic to the children of several neighboring ranching families, holding informal lessons twice a week in their front room, and the parents were so grateful that they often paid in goods or labor, helping with projects around the ranch in exchange for their children's education. One warm April evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Sophia turned to Beckett with a nervous but excited expression. "I have something to tell you," she said. Beckett felt his heart skip. "All right." "I think I am pregnant," Sophia said, the words tumbling out. "I am not completely certain. It is still early, but all the signs are there, and I have been feeling strange in the mornings, and I just have this sense that something is different." Beckett felt joy explode through him like fireworks. "Are you serious? We are going to have a baby." "I think so," Sophia said, laughing at his reaction. "Are you happy about it? I know we have not talked much about children, about timing." "Happy?" Beckett pulled her into his arms, careful of her even though she had said it was early. "Sophia, I am beyond happy. This is everything I wanted, everything I did not even know to want. You and a family, a real family, here on this ranch we are building together." As the months passed, and Sophia's pregnancy became obvious, Beckett found himself amazed at how naturally she adapted to the physical changes, never complaining even when he knew she must be uncomfortable, still insisting on helping with chores until he finally put his foot down and made her promise to take it easier. Maggie visited frequently, sharing advice and reassurance from her own experience as a mother, and the bond between aunt and niece deepened into something beautiful to witness. In late October 1879, almost exactly 1 year after Sophia had first arrived in Beckett's life, she went into labor on a cool evening with the first hint of winter in the air. Maggie had come to stay with them a week earlier in anticipation, and she took charge with calm efficiency, while Beckett paced anxiously in the front room, trying not to imagine everything that could go wrong. He had delivered calves and foals countless times, had seen birth as a routine part of ranch life, but this was different. This was Sophia, and the fear that gripped him was unlike anything he had experienced. It was a long night, and Beckett aged years in those hours, listening to the sounds from the bedroom and feeling utterly useless. But finally, as dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, he heard a new sound, the thin wail of an infant, and then Maggie was calling him in. Sophia looked exhausted but radiant, propped up against pillows with a tiny bundle in her arms, and when Beckett approached the bed, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Beckett looked down at the baby, at the impossibly small face and the eyes that were trying to focus, and felt something break open in his chest. "A son," he repeated wonderingly. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Sophia asked. "We talked about several options, but I want to hear what feels right to you now that he is here." Beckett thought about his parents, about his brother, about the legacy he wanted to build for this new little person who would carry on the ranch after he was gone. "What about Samuel?" he suggested. "It was my father's middle name, and I always liked it." "Samuel Emerson," Sophia tested the name, then smiled. "Yes, I think that is perfect." The first year of Samuel's life was a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry and profound joy unlike anything Beckett had known existed. He would stand over the cradle just watching his son sleep, marveling at the tiny perfection of him, at the miracle that he and Sophia had created this person. Sophia took to motherhood with the same competence she brought to everything else, managing the household and the baby, and even resuming her informal teaching, once Samuel was a few months old and more settled into a routine. By the time Samuel was walking and starting to talk in short sentences, Beckett had expanded their ranch significantly, building additional structures and increasing the herd to the point where he needed to hire seasonal help during roundup and branding. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and stable, and that felt like an incredible achievement given where Beckett had been just a few years earlier. One evening in the summer of 1881, as they sat on their porch watching Samuel chase chickens in the yard with more enthusiasm than success, Sophia reached over and took Beckett's hand. "Can you believe we have been married almost 3 years?" she said. "Best 3 years of my life," Beckett replied honestly. "I keep waiting to wake up and discover this was all a dream." "It is real," Sophia assured him, squeezing his hand. "We are real. This life we have built is real. And I want you to know how grateful I am, how much I love what we have created together." "I should be the one saying that to you," Beckett protested. "You gave up everything, came all the way from Philadelphia to this harsh territory, married a rancher with more ambition than resources. You could have had an easier life, but not a better one," Sophia said firmly. "Not a happier one. I found exactly what I needed here, exactly who I needed. I would not trade this life for anything." In 1882, Sophia discovered she was pregnant again, and this time Beckett was prepared, or at least less terrified than the first time. Their daughter was born in March of 1883, a healthy baby girl they named Charlotte after Sophia's mother. And Samuel, now 3.5, was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to help with everything and being remarkably gentle for a rambunctious toddler. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and growth, both of the children and of the ranch. Beckett's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher grew, and he was frequently consulted by neighboring landowners about breeding stock or land management. Sophia's informal school evolved into a more structured arrangement, with her teaching a group of 8 children 3 times a week in a small building Beckett built specifically for that purpose. The families paid what they could, and the income, while modest, gave Sophia a sense of purpose and accomplishment beyond her roles as wife and mother. By 1885, when Samuel was nearly 6 and Charlotte was 2, the ranch had become one of the more successful operations in the area surrounding Las Cruces, and Beckett found himself involved in community decisions about water rights and grazing lands. He served on the town council for a term, attending monthly meetings in Las Cruces and representing the interests of the outlying ranchers, and Sophia supported him fully, even when it meant extra work for her managing things at home. It was during this time that they faced their first real crisis as a couple. A severe drought in the summer of 1886 threatened their water supply and made grazing difficult, and Beckett was forced to make hard decisions about reducing the herd and cutting expenses. The stress wore on him, making him short-tempered and anxious, and there were several tense weeks where he and Sophia barely spoke beyond necessary household communication. Finally, Sophia confronted him one evening after the children were asleep, standing in front of him with her arms crossed and her expression serious. "We need to talk about what is happening," she said. "I know things are tight," Beckett said wearily. "I am doing everything I can to keep us afloat." "I am not talking about the money or the ranch," Sophia said. "I am talking about us, about how you have shut me out these past weeks, how you are carrying all this alone instead of letting me help." "How can you help?" Beckett asked, more sharply than he intended. You cannot make it rain, you cannot make the grass grow, you cannot change the fact that we might lose everything I have worked for. No, but I can be your partner instead of just another problem you have to manage, Sophia said, her voice rising to match his. I can think through options with you. I can make suggestions. I can at least listen and support you instead of being kept in the dark about how bad things really are. That is what marriage is supposed to be, Beckett. We are supposed to face these things together, not you protecting me from reality like I am too fragile to handle it. The words hit Beckett like cold water, making him realize how he had been treating her, how he had unconsciously fallen into the pattern of shouldering everything alone the way he had before she came into his life. You are right, he said quietly. I am sorry. I have been so focused on trying to fix this, on trying to be strong enough to handle it, that I forgot I do not have to be alone anymore, that I have you. They talked late into the night, really talked about their finances and their options and their fears. And by the time they went to bed, Beckett felt lighter than he had in weeks. The drought was still a problem. The financial situation was still precarious. But facing it with Sophia instead of alone made all the difference. Together, they came up with a plan to sell off part of their herd before prices dropped further, to take on some debt secured against the land to get through the lean period, and to diversify by adding chickens and pigs that required less grazing land. The plan worked. The drought eventually broke, and by the spring of 1887, things were looking up again. The experience had tested them but ultimately made their marriage stronger, teaching them both important lessons about communication and partnership. Beckett made a conscious effort after that to include Sophia in all major decisions, to value her input and perspective, and their relationship deepened as a result. In the fall of 1887, Sophia announced another pregnancy, and though it had not been planned, both of them were thrilled. Their third child, a son they named Benjamin, arrived in May of 1888, and Samuel and Charlotte were both old enough now to be genuinely helpful with the new baby, which made things considerably easier than the previous two births had been. As the children grew, the house became louder and more chaotic and infinitely more filled with love. Samuel showed early promise at ranching, following Beckett around and asking endless questions about cattle and horses and land management. Charlotte was more interested in books and learning, spending hours with Sophia and the other children during teaching sessions, and showing a natural talent for reading and arithmetic that made Sophia beam with pride. Benjamin was still too young to show clear preferences, but he was a cheerful, easy baby who seemed content as long as someone was holding him. On a warm evening in September 1890, as Beckett and Sophia sat on their porch watching the three children play in the yard, Beckett reflected on how impossibly far he had come from that desperate night in October 1878 when he had fired his gun at the sky and shouted his prayer into the darkness. He had been so alone then, so convinced that his life would be one of solitary struggle, and now his life was full to overflowing with family and purpose and love. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked, as she so often did when she caught him in a contemplative mood. "That night I prayed for companionship," Beckett said honestly. "How desperate I felt, how alone, how I never could have imagined this, all of this would come from that moment." Sophia smiled, reaching over to take his hand. "I think about my journey too sometimes, about how terrified I was walking through that desert, about how close I came to dying out there. And then I think about waking up in your house, looking up and seeing your face, and knowing somehow that I was exactly where I was supposed to be." "Do you ever regret it?" Beckett asked. "Leaving Philadelphia, giving up the life you could have had there?" "Never," Sophia said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, this is everything I wanted and more than I knew to hope for. I found myself here, Beckett, found who I was really meant to be. How could I possibly regret that?" Samuel, now nearly 11, came running up to the porch at that moment, his face flushed with excitement. "Father, can I take Star out for a ride before dark? I want to check the north pasture like you showed me." Beckett looked at his son, so earnest and eager, already showing the responsibility and work ethic that would serve him well as he grew into a man. "All right, but take your rifle and be back before full dark. Your mother will worry." "I will," Samuel promised. Already running toward the barn, Charlotte, who was now 7, climbed onto the porch and settled herself next to Sophia. "Can you read to me tonight, Mother? From the new book Uncle Robert brought last week." "Of course," Sophia agreed, stroking her daughter's dark hair, so similar to her own. "After supper and after your brother gets back safely." Benjamin, not quite 2 and determined not to be left out, toddled over and climbed into Beckett's lap, sticky fingers and all, babbling something incomprehensible but clearly important. Beckett held his youngest son, breathing in the smell of sun and dirt and childhood, and felt his heart swell with gratitude so profound. It was almost painful. The years continued their steady march, bringing the usual mixture of challenges and joys that characterized life on a frontier ranch. There were good years when the rains came at the right times, and the cattle thrived, and lean years when drought or disease or market fluctuations tested their resources and resolve. There were injuries and illnesses that brought terror, followed by relief when they proved minor or when recovery came. There were milestones celebrated. Samuel's first successful solo cattle drive at 14, Charlotte's first teaching lesson when she helped Sophia with the younger students at 12, Benjamin's first horse broken at 11. In 1895, when Samuel was 16 and already a capable rancher in his own right, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring family, a sweet girl named Emily, who Sophia approved of wholeheartedly. Beckett watched his son navigate the awkwardness of young love with amusement and sympathy, remembering his own desperate loneliness at that age and feeling grateful that Samuel would never have to experience that his son was growing up surrounded by family and community and clear paths to happiness. By 1898, the ranch had expanded significantly, with Beckett and an older Samuel working as true partners to manage the growing operation. They had hired 2 permanent ranch hands and employed several more during busy seasons, and the brand they had registered years ago was now recognized throughout the territory as a mark of quality stock. Sophia had formalized her teaching, working with the town to establish an actual school that met in a small building in Las Cruces, and she traveled into town 4 days a week to teach a mixed-age classroom of about 20 students. Charlotte, at 15, was helping her mother with teaching while also showing interest in nursing, having assisted the town doctor several times with emergency calls. She was thoughtful and compassionate, with her mother's intelligence and her father's steady calm in a crisis. Benjamin, at 10, was the most adventurous of the 3 children, always pushing boundaries and exploring, keeping both his parents on their toes with his bold nature and endless energy. One evening in the summer of 1899, as Beckett and Sophia celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children had gone to bed, Beckett raised his glass of wine in a toast. "To 20 years," he said. "To the woman who changed my life, who gave me everything I did not know I needed, who has been my partner and my love through all of it." Sophia touched her glass to his, her eyes bright with emotion even after all these years. "To the man who saved my life in more ways than one," she replied. "Who gave me a home and a purpose and a family beyond anything I dreamed possible. To us, and to whatever comes next." They drank, and then Beckett reached across the table to take her hand, noting the small signs of aging they both bore now, the silver threads in Sophia's dark hair, the lines around Beckett's eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the calluses and scars that marked decades of hard work. But beneath those surface changes, they were still the same people who had fallen in love over conversations on a porch in the autumn of 1878, still united by the same deep connection and commitment that had sustained them through everything. "You remember that first week?" Beckett asked. "When you were recovering, and we were both trying to figure out what was happening." "I remember being terrified," Sophia admitted. "Terrified that I was imposing, that you were just being kind and would be relieved when I left. And then terrified that I was falling for you too fast, that I was being foolish again like I had been with Richard. And I was terrified I would never see you again after I took you to your aunt's," Beckett said. "That you were just passing through my life briefly, that I had gotten a glimpse of what companionship could be like only to have it taken away. We were both fools," Sophia said fondly, "but lucky fools." In 1901, Samuel married Emily in a beautiful ceremony that seemed to invite half the territory, and Beckett and Sophia helped the young couple establish their own small ranch adjacent to the main property. It was bittersweet, watching their eldest son begin his own family, but also profoundly satisfying to see the legacy continuing, to know that what they had built would endure beyond their own lives. Charlotte, now 18, had decided to pursue nursing more seriously, and was studying under the town doctor with the goal of eventually traveling to San Francisco for formal training. It was an ambitious plan for a young woman in 1901 New Mexico, but Sophia and Beckett supported her fully, proud of her determination and compassion. Benjamin, at 13, was starting to settle down from his wild childhood, showing unexpected aptitude for the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records, and having an intuitive sense for market timing that impressed both his father and older brother. As Beckett entered his early 50s in 1903, he began thinking more about legacy and succession, about ensuring that the ranch would continue to thrive when he and Sophia were no longer there to run it. He legally formalized the partnership with Samuel, drawing up papers that gave his son an official stake in the operation, and he began teaching Benjamin the financial aspects of ranching with the same care he had taught Samuel the practical skills. Sophia, now approaching 50 herself, had handed over primary teaching duties to Charlotte and another young woman, though she still filled in regularly and served on the school board. She had become a respected figure in Las Cruces, known for her intelligence and fairness, and was frequently consulted on matters involving education and children's welfare. She remained beautiful to Beckett, perhaps more so than when they had first met, because now he saw not just her physical features but the entirety of the remarkable life she had lived, the strength and grace with which she had faced every challenge. On a cool October evening in 1903, exactly 25 years after Sophia had first arrived in Beckett's life, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained through all the years and all the changes. The porch itself had been rebuilt and expanded multiple times, but it remained their favorite place, the spot where they reconnected at the end of each day and reminded themselves what mattered most. 25 years, Sophia mused, echoing his own thoughts. A quarter of a century since I collapsed in the desert and Tom Fisher found me. Since I woke up in your bed not knowing where I was or if I would survive. Since I prayed for companionship and you appeared like an answer straight from heaven," Beckett added, using the phrase he had thought so many times over the years. "I still think about that night sometimes, about how close I came to just accepting loneliness as my fate. What would have happened if I had not said that prayer, if I had not put it out into the universe that I needed someone? I think we still would have found each other," Sophia said thoughtfully. "Maybe not in the same way, maybe not at the same time, but somehow. Because this was meant to be, Beckett. We were meant to be. I truly believe that." "I do too," Beckett agreed, pulling her closer against the evening chill. "Best thing that ever happened to me, even if it started with you half dead and fevered in my wagon." Sophia laughed, the sound as warm and musical as it had been when she was 23. "Best thing that ever happened to me, even if it started with me making the spectacularly poor decision to walk through the desert in October. We made a good life, did we not? A really good life." "The best," Beckett confirmed, looking out at the land they had worked together, the house they had filled with children and love, the legacy they were building for generations to come. "Better than anything I dreamed of, even in my most optimistic moments." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and the first stars appeared. Two people who had come together through what felt like divine intervention and had built something lasting and true. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. Cattle settling for the night, horses moving in their corrals, the distant sound of Samuel and Emily's laughter from their nearby house, the warm glow of lamplight from windows indicating family and warmth and home. Beckett Emerson, who had once been so desperately alone that he fired a gun at the sky and shouted his prayer into the darkness, now had everything he had asked for and immeasurably more. And Sophia Kendall Emerson, who had fled Philadelphia in search of a fresh start and nearly died in the attempt, had found not just a new life but the right life, the one she was always meant to live. Together, they had transformed loneliness into love, desperation into family, and a simple prayer into a legacy that would endure for generations. And as they sat together watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky, they knew with absolute certainty that every hardship they had faced, every challenge they had overcome, had been worth it to arrive at this moment, this life, this perfect testament to the power of answered prayers and the enduring strength of love. Years continued to unfold in their predictable yet precious patterns. In 1905, Samuel and Emily welcomed their first child, making Beckett and Sophia grandparents for the first time. The baby girl, named Sophia after her grandmother, brought new joy to the family and gave Beckett fresh perspective on how his own parents must have felt watching him grow up. He would hold his tiny granddaughter and marvel at the continuation of generations, at how that desperate, lonely man from 1878 had become this person with children and grandchildren, and a thriving legacy. Charlotte completed her nursing training in San Francisco in 1906 and returned to Las Cruces to open a small clinic, becoming the first formally trained nurse in the area. She never married, finding fulfillment in her work and her close relationships with family and friends, and neither Sophia nor Beckett ever pressured her about it, understanding from their own experiences that happiness came in many forms. Benjamin, surprising everyone, developed a passion for breeding horses rather than cattle, and by his early 20s had established a reputation for producing excellent working animals. He married in 1908 at 20, choosing a spirited young woman named Maria, whose family had ranched in the area for generations, and together they built a horse operation that complemented the cattle ranch beautifully. In 1910, as Beckett turned 58 and Sophia approached 55, they made the decision to officially retire from the day-to-day management of the ranch, turning over full control to Samuel while maintaining ownership and advisory roles. It felt strange at first, stepping back from work that had defined their lives for decades, but it also opened up new opportunities for them to travel, to visit relatives in other parts of the territory, and simply to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They took a trip to San Francisco in the spring of 1911, their first major journey together since Sophia had arrived from Philadelphia over 30 years earlier. They stayed with Charlotte for 2 weeks, exploring the city that had been rebuilt after the devastating earthquake and fire of 1906, attending the theater and dining in restaurants and experiencing the bustle of urban life that was so different from their ranch existence. It was wonderful and exhausting, and by the end of the 2 weeks, both of them were eager to return to New Mexico, to the wide open spaces and the slower pace and the family that waited for them. "I think we are definitely ranch people," Sophia said with a laugh as their train rolled back into Las Cruces. "The city was lovely, but I missed the quiet, missed being able to see the horizon. Missed our porch," Beckett added, and Sophia nodded enthusiastically. By 1915, Samuel and Emily had 4 children. Benjamin and Maria had 3. And Charlotte remained happily committed to her nursing practice and her role as the beloved maiden aunt who spoiled all the children shamelessly. The extended family gathered often for meals and celebrations, and the ranch that Beckett had built alone had become the center of a sprawling, vibrant family network. One warm evening in October 1918, exactly 40 years after Sophia had first arrived in his life, Beckett and Sophia sat on their porch as they had countless times before. They were both in their 60s now, moving a bit slower, needing more rest, but fundamentally still the same people who had fallen in love over conversations and sunset watching 4 decades earlier. 40 years, Beckett said wonderingly. 4 decades since Tom Fisher brought you to my door, since I carried you into my house not having any idea you were going to change everything. 40 years since I opened my eyes and saw you, since you promised me I was going to be all right, Sophia replied, her hand finding his with the unconscious ease of long practice. Best 40 years anyone could ask for. You ever think about how it almost did not happen? Beckett asked. How many things had to align perfectly for us to find each other? If you had not left Philadelphia, if the stage had not broken down, if Tom had not found you, if my ranch had not been the closest place to bring you. I used to think about that sometimes, Sophia admitted. Especially in the early years, I would lie awake and think about all the ways we could have missed each other. All the tiny choices and chances that had to work out exactly right. But eventually I stopped, because whether you call it fate or providence or simply incredible luck, we did find each other, and that is what matters. We got our 40 years, Beckett, and God willing, we will get more. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the familiar landscape fade into twilight, surrounded by the sounds of family and home. Inside the house behind them, they could hear their grandchildren playing, voices raised in laughter and mock argument. From the direction of Samuel's house came the sound of a fiddle, someone practicing a tune for an upcoming dance in town. The cattle were settling for the night, the horses were quiet in their corrals, and the whole ranch seemed to breathe with contentment. You know what I am most grateful for? Beckett said suddenly. It is not the ranch, though I am proud of what we built. It is not even the children and grandchildren, though they bring me more joy than I can express. It is the fact that I got to share all of it with you, that I never had to face any of it alone. You gave me that, Sophia, when you rode out to my ranch that day and told me you were falling in love with me. You gave me partnership and companionship and love, and I have never taken a single day of it for granted. Sophia turned to him with tears in her eyes, her hand tightening on his. "You gave me the same, Beckett. You gave me a home and a purpose and a family when I had lost everything and was running toward an uncertain future. You made me feel valued and capable and loved, and you never tried to change me or make me into something I was not. That is the greatest gift anyone could receive." They held each other as the stars emerged, two people who had started as strangers brought together by desperate circumstances, and had built a love story that had endured through decades of hardship and joy, of challenges overcome and dreams achieved. The lonely cowboy who had prayed for companionship had received so much more than he had asked for, and the woman who had arrived on his doorstep like an answer straight from heaven had found her own prayers answered in return. As the night deepened and they finally rose to go inside, Beckett looked back at the land one more time, at the legacy they had created not just in terms of property and prosperity, but in terms of family and love and lives well lived. He thought about that desperate man from 40 years ago, firing a gun at the sky and shouting his loneliness to God. And he wished he could go back and tell that man that everything was going to be all right, that help was coming, that an answer was already on its way in the form of a dark-haired woman walking through the desert toward an uncertain future. But he could not go back, could only move forward, and as he followed Sophia into their home, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, he knew that was exactly as it should be. The prayer had been answered, the promise had been kept, and the love that had bloomed from that chance meeting had proven stronger and more enduring than either of them could have imagined. They lived out their remaining years in peace and comfort, watching their grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren, seeing the ranch continue to thrive under Samuel's capable management and Benjamin's business acumen, taking pride in Charlotte's ongoing work serving the community through her nursing. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1928, surrounded by so much family that 3 tables had to be set up in the yard to accommodate everyone. And as Beckett looked around at the gathering, at the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who existed because of that desperate prayer and unlikely meeting, he felt his heart overflow with gratitude and joy. Sophia passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1932, at the age of 76, with Beckett holding her hand and their children gathered around. The loss was devastating, even though they had known it was coming, even though they had been blessed with over 50 years together. Beckett felt the loneliness threaten to return, that old familiar ache that had driven him to prayer so many decades ago. But it was different now, because he was not truly alone. He had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He had memories and a legacy. And he had the absolute certainty that he had been blessed beyond measure by the years he had shared with Sophia. He lived another 3 years, spending his days on the porch they had shared, telling stories about Sophia to any grandchild or great-grandchild who would listen, making sure that her memory remained vivid and alive for generations who had not known her in her youth. He talked about how she had arrived in his life like an answer to prayer, how she had transformed his loneliness into love, how she had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Beckett Emerson died in October 1935. Exactly 57 years after that desperate night when he had fired his gun at the sky and prayed for companionship. He passed away on the porch he had shared with Sophia for over 5 decades, watching the same sunset they had watched together countless times, and his last thought was of her smile, of the way she had looked at him across Tom Fisher's wagon that first day, of the incredible journey they had taken together. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a simple stone that bore their names and dates and the inscription, "Answered Prayers." The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, and the story of the lonely cowboy who prayed for companionship and the woman who arrived like an answer from heaven became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of faith and love, and the miraculous ways that life can change in an instant. And on quiet October evenings, when the light slants gold across the New Mexico landscape, and the air holds that particular quality of autumn, people swear they can sometimes see two figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the sunset together, still in love after all these years, still grateful for the answered prayer that brought them together and the lifetime of love that followed.